views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronx Net or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Public Health America, a 30-minute program on Bronx Net where we talk with national experts to promote health and social justice. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. We begin by focusing on a current health topic from the COVID pandemic to cardiovascular disease. Our goal is to provide you with not only the best science, but practical tips to live a healthier life. On Public Health America, we also celebrate what studies have long documented, namely the unparalleled value of a college education by setting the stage to pursue a career of your choice, increase lifetime earnings and opportunity, and champion the ability to engage in civil debate. But for many, finding a path to college is neither clear nor certain. What if you're a high school student with supportive parents but feel daunted by the prospect of being the first in your family to attend college? What if you're a single mother or father and want to attend college but have no childcare? On Public Health America, our expert will also talk about decisions they made and support they received that helped them beat the odds. By sharing one or two life lessons, their stories may provide you with the inspiration and method to realize your dreams. This is Public Health America. Welcome to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. It is my pleasure and privilege to have with us today Rabbi Bob Kaplan, Executive Director of the Center for Community Leadership, and recently appointed as one of the commissioners of the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Welcome, Rabbi Bob.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. So, you have a long and distinguished history of working in urban communities throughout New York City, the Bronx. And we're doing this 4-segment series where we're looking at the relationship between faith and places of worship that work to foster health and public health. Tell us a little bit about your work and things you've been doing past, present, and future.
Sure enough. So I work for an organization called the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. It's an umbrella group for about 60 major Jewish organizations. And the particular niche that I focus on there is how do we build relationships with the complete and complex diversity of New York. And one of the tools that we've used is coalition building. And a lot of that has focused on healthcare as a way of folks coming to the table, looking at issues of commonality and sometimes issues that they didn't even understand that other people had from different cultures, and beginning to find solutions to some of those issues. So healthcare has been literally since the beginning one of the main areas that we've taken a look at. I have to admit, when I first started, I understood maybe you took a pill when you felt not well, become a little bit more of an expert in this kind of thing. However, we have felt that people, when they come to a table and from a multi-stakeholder point of view, can really create some unique and important and powerful solutions to issues like healthcare disparities or other kinds of issues facing us from a healthcare perspective.
Got it. So tell us, building coalitions to foster health equity makes a lot of sense to me. Why don't you give us an example or two of a coalition that you've organized? And I'd be very interested to know the various stakeholders that you brought to those tables and those coalitions.
Sure. Now, let me start with the stakeholders. It's always important to have all the stakeholders there. You have to have the healthcare delivery system. You have to have government. You have to have the insurers. You have to have the communities that you want to reach. So that was sort of the playbook that we've been using since the beginning when we formed the Northern Queens Health Coalition that looked at the new populations that were, moving into Northern Queens that didn't necessarily have a relationship with the healthcare system and vice versa. And those relationships needed to happen in a culturally competent way. I remember once that we were working with one particular system and we ran a healthcare expo. I come from the business world. We ran an expo and they brought in a few folks that spoke a few languages, but however, there were many languages. And they came to us, well, with the question of how do we handle this complexity? And that was the beginning of the journey of them understanding just how difficult it was going to be, but what the necessity was in making sure that linguistically they were competent and culturally they were competent long before the issue and language of cultural competency was on the horizon.
Sure. I mean, we've definitely had several guests that have talked about the importance of having stakeholders, including community members themselves, at the table to inform policy and how healthcare is delivered. Now, it makes me think today, of course, of vaccine uptake and how rates of vaccine uptake in urban settings and particularly certain neighborhoods has been low. Has it been a focus of any of these coalitions to, get community members to those tables to ask them, how do we get more folks in your neighborhoods to take vaccine?
So we started working with the healthcare delivery systems and the community immediately as COVID hit. And it was really hard because you're doing this all virtually. So we began a coalition literally a couple of months into COVID called the Brooklyn Coalition on Healthcare Disparities, fully understanding that the horrific impact on communities of color and other populations of COVID in death rates and sickness rates was because of long-term healthcare disparities, not just because of this one particular incident, but we needed to address the issue of healthcare disparities and make sure that when COVID, and God willing, it will pass, when COVID will pass, that the issue of healthcare disparities was not going, and its consciousness about it was not going to pass as well, that we were going to begin to address in a very effective way how racial injustice played out in healthcare disparities. So working to ensure that all the stakeholders in the community were talking, however, on vaccinations, to make sure that the folks who are doing the vaccinations worked with the communities, particularly houses of faith, because that is one of the key door openers to be able to give the right information in the right way and the right time.
Got it. So you mentioned faith. Let's pick up on that. We were very fortunate to have Sheikh Busa Drama on recently, and he spoke very warmly and highly of you. Tell us a little bit about some of the interfaith types of initiatives you've been involved with, and what interfaith means, and what have been some objectives that you've worked on.
Well, interfaith can mean a lot of things. It can mean just getting together and sharing your faith with another person, or sharing the impact of your faith with another person. So it's interesting with the Sheikh. He and I met a number of years ago, and one day during Ramadan, which we're in right now, he invited me up to his mosque, his Islamic school up in Parkchester, the Bronx. And I went up there, and he's showing me around. He said, here's the prayer hall, and here's the classrooms, and here's the meeting rooms, and here's the synagogue. So I looked at him and said, Sheikh, have you been fasting a little too much at synagogue? And he opened the door, and sure enough, there was a synagogue there. He understood that there were people who were living in the community. The community had changed. Previously primarily a Jewish community. It now became primarily an African and South Asian community, primarily Muslim, that these folks needed a place to pray. And when the last synagogue closed up, he provided a space. That's faith in action. That's putting aside all the political stuff, all the areas of conflict, that are happening 10,000 miles away from here. That's making sure that when you know somebody needs something like a place to pray, and you have the place where they can go, to set that all aside and create oases of opportunity in society. That created a linkage between the work that he does and the work that we do that has been almost unbreakable. So it is extended into so many different things in society. The issue of gangs and gun violence in the Bronx, the issue of healthcare in the Bronx, the issue of leadership development in the Bronx. Once you create the relationship through acts of faith, well, they become bonds that open doors that you didn't even know existed.
That's a wonderful story and a lovely example. Do you find that, when faiths come together, that people of goodwill just find naturally, organically points of connect? Or do you feel that, and by the way, I'm just giving you an either or, and probably both are not exactly right, and that's okay. But do you find that having some sort of leadership structure or just structure generally helps sort of bring an interfaith kind of initiative together in a way that they can accomplish more? Is that a fair question?
It's an important question, because you have to be intentional about this. It just doesn't happen. Just because someone believes in God and another person believes in God, often their expression of that belief can be different. However, when you begin to dig down a little deeper, you find out where the points of commonality are. And if you are intentional and can bring people together and find those places where you agree and understand and lend dignity to those places where you don't agree, and I want to double down on that word dignity, understand that the narrative of another person's faith is as important and as powerful in their life as your narrative is, even if you don't agree with it. It means that you can find ways to solve problems in the context of society and create relationships, like I said before, that become altering of society itself.
Absolutely, and extremely well said. I want to underscore, I would suggest that today, giving dignity to difference is sorely lacking in public discourse and very much needed. And perhaps that is an element of interfaith initiatives that they might not be completely unique to that realm of getting communities together, but perhaps they're a major aspect of it, and that is just so much needed. We have a couple minutes left. You've mentioned a variety of projects that you're working on and coalitions you've built. What's a primary focus these days?
Well, leadership development is a big one. Getting leaders in a room. We just developed a new leadership fellowship in Brooklyn called the We Are All Brooklyn Fellowship Against Hate. We're doing this with the Mayor's Office on Hate Crimes Prevention, where it's a boot camp style, where about 18 leaders, influencers in the community are learning about how to prevent and meet the challenge of hate crimes together. We're hoping to get the funding will come through to bring this to Queens and to the Bronx in relatively short order. However, we feel that once you get leaders in the same room and they can begin to unpack issues through their lenses and the lenses of the other, understand how it's impacting society and how it's impacting them, they can become the instruments of the change that you need to see happen. You said it well. We're living in a society of toxic polarity. And if we're, again, not intentional about moving it in the other way and creating proximity between folks and creating those lines of communication and cooperation, then we're failing in our responsibilities.
Absolutely. And on such a cogent and well made statement, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to speak with Rabbi Kaplan, who will tell us a little bit about his personal journey and how his education and leadership training provided the basis for such an exceptional career. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. We'll be right back.
a media network for you.
Bronx Net TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on Bronx Net.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. Bronx Net TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
Bronx Net.
Welcome back to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. So, Rabbi Kaplan, in this part of the segment, I always open with the same question, and that is, where were you born and what were some of your formative experiences?
Sure enough. I am Brooklyn born. I live in the Bronx right now. And I always kid around, when you're Brooklyn born and you move to the Bronx, you have to take sort of a 12-step program to be able to make the change. However, it's been working out fine. So I would say that the best formation pieces that I grew up in the New York City housing project. I know they don't like to use the word project anymore. However, it was in Canarsie in Brooklyn. I grew up with every kind of folk that was out there. And to me, that was normative. So I would say that the work that I do now in diversity is because of who I was as a child. You just lived and grew with everybody that was struggling. You're in a project, means that you're struggling a little bit. And that really allowed me to understand that diversity and other kinds of folks in the world that weren't exactly like me were going to be my friends, were going to be my helpmates, and were going to be the people that I traveled with.
That's great. Yeah, we've had several guests that were born and raised in New York City, and it's not uncommon that the sort of inherent respect and admiration of true diversity has been echoed as a really lovely underpinning. Let's tell me a little bit about your parents, or what was your education like when you were young? What was the expectation in terms of if you would go to college or not? What were those experiences like?
Sure. My parents are first generation Americans. My grandparents all from the Ukraine, different parts of the Ukraine. They were refugees. They came to America because life wasn't exactly safe over there as it is not right now. And my parents really wanted me to participate in the American dream, and what that all meant to them as Jews coming to America, and for the first time having the opportunity of education. I went to public schools. I went to a public high school. One of my classmates I always kid around was the Reverend Al Sharpton. Al and I know each other for a really long time. And then I went to CUNY schools. I went to York College. I went to Brooklyn College. And I want to say it was during when I was a political science history major that I had one of these epiphanal moments that a professor said to me, well, if you really want to understand what's going on, you got to read the right, you got to read the left, you have to read the middle, and then it's up to you to figure out where you and how you understand what's happening out there. Don't take any one side's word for it. You are responsible for how you assimilate information. Well, I couldn't have been a more important moment for me, because that plays out in every day in the work that I do here in New York, to always hear what other narratives are, begin to vet it out, and then to use who I am and what I am to begin to understand what's really happening, as opposed to taking one news source or another newspaper or another news source's word for it.
What an absolutely fabulous anecdote. I love it. Read the right, read the left, read the middle, and then figure it out for yourself. I think if we could get more people to do that 3% of the time, I think we could move the needle in a very big way.
God willing, yeah.
So that's, and York and Brooklyn, obviously both great schools. You were a poli-sci major at one or both? Is that?
I was a poli-sci history major at both. I initially went to York because it was an experimental school out in Queens. My grandparents are from Jamaica. It was located in Jamaica, Queens. Then I figured I'll bring it a little closer to home in Brooklyn. Another experience that happened to me was some spiritual experience. I grew up a pretty secular kid, and taking a philosophy of religion course, I was turned on to the whole notion of a spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it wasn't necessarily a Jewish spiritual journey, but it was a spiritual journey. I spent a number of years on that spiritual journey, eventually winding up in my own faith as a way of expressing, again, who I am, and what my role in the world is. Had I not been in that class, I'm not quite sure where I would have wound up.
Sure. That's pretty remarkable, sort of moment of how that led to, something so significant. That's also a wonderful story. So so let's stay at Brooklyn for a little bit. What were one or two experiences, either with faculty or with your peers or the community, that were there any challenges you faced? Were there particularly protective things that you experienced that help you sort of move to the next level? What are some things around those dimensions?
Well, I went to college during the early 1970s, during the anti-war movement period. So it was a time of great upheaval. Campus was closed up every so often for various different demonstrations, but it was also a time of great exploration. And it was a time that I had the opportunity to listen to folks who had been down the road a piece. And that's something, again, that I really valued in my educational experience, and value to this day in my educational experiences, is hearing from folks who have, quote unquote, been up the mountain, walked around a little bit, breathed that air, and then decided to come back down and be amongst us and teach us and allow us to see where the mountain was and know how we can go up there and walk around as well. So I would say the challenges always were, it's like I came from a relatively middle-class family, had to work. I drove a taxi when I went to college, had to work, had to go to school, had to figure it out, had to figure out who I was and what I was and how I fit into the world around me. And the other thing is I wanted to be a teacher, and I found out a history teacher relatively early on that because of the war in Vietnam and because of the role that teachers were playing in people getting exemptions from being drafted, that was not going to be the career path that I was going to take, because there was simply not going to be any jobs. So I had to figure out what that was all about. But that seems to have worked out.
Wonderful. And then, so what came after Brooklyn College? What was your next step?
Well, I have an unusual story, but not unusual for that era. I moved to the Berkshires. I lived in a spiritual commune because of that spiritual experience. Did that for a couple of years, got married, came home, started working, and became a salesman, pretty good at sales. I became a store manager. I became an operations manager. But somewhere along the road, I had to decide that I wasn't feeling fulfilled just being in the business world. I started touching the not-for-profit world. I began to look at how I could play a role in fixing some of the broken pieces in the world. And I took a step out of the business world into the not-for-profit world, in the world of alternative energy. And it's been no turning back since. And I've been just journeying in that not-for-profit world, learning how I can utilize the God-given skills and the stuff I've learned on the road to be able to help others.
So I'd like to ask you what I personally think is a difficult question. And I'm eager to get your sense of it. I find that as we age, and I'm in my very late 50s, I've got quite a few friends across a variety of disciplines. Many are academics, but many are not, and many are in business, or in other various fields. But they're all pretty good eggs, and in one way or another, they've worked, and some solely worked to try to advance things like health equity, social justice in some fashion, and many of those involving faith-based initiatives and others secular. But I have to say, and here comes the question. It just seems like, and let's come back to Ukraine for a moment, look at the horrors that are going on there and the complexity of those horrors. And I've been to Ukraine and done some work there. Obviously, I don't know it nearly as well as you do, but have great respect for the people there. And you're doing work on hate crimes, and, last couple of years have just been really tough, even though obviously they've been tough for a long time. So here's the question. I see a lot of burnout. I see, people as they get on of just like, when are things going to qualitatively get better? When are these enormous divides going to lessen? And what do you say to someone who's committed their life to moving the needle, but then just forever feeling like the myth of Sisyphus, that the boulder just keeps rolling on back down the mountain?
So being a person of faith, I turn to my faith often. There's a Talmudic story about a rabbi who's planting a tree that we know, a carob tree, that we know will not bear fruit for 70 years. And the person walks over to him and goes, why are you doing this? You're never going to see the fruit. I mean, you're an older person. How can you be planting this tree? He says, well, I'm planting this tree because somebody's got to plant the tree for the future. I know the work that I'm doing is only a planting. The fellowships, the young leadership that I get to engage in. And by the way, one of the things that keeps me going is because I am a deep believer in what I call intergenerational learning. I have as much learning to do from other folks who are younger than me, who are seeing the world through their lenses, as hopefully they have from me. However, I got to plant that tree because, you got to know who you are. You got to know your own, this issue of mortality. My job is not to end the work. My job is just to be engaged and begin the process for a next generation, giving them the tools, giving them the understanding of where they need to bring it. I'm sort of looking at the twilight of my career at JCRC. Probably leave in the next few years. However, I am feeling really good that I've hopefully influenced enough people to do this work for the future through the lens of folks who will understand where we are at now. So to be able to use the past, present, and future, bringing it all together, and not saying I don't get burnt out. God knows that happens to a lot of folks. However, what brings me back is the faith and understanding that although issues like war and hate crimes and all that kind of stuff is going to continue, that we are part of the solution in making sure that when it does happen, we can come together and fix the world from the brokenness that comes from that.
What an absolutely wonderful anecdote and story, and a way to think about the enormous stress that we face in trying to promote social justice and health equity. It has been such a pleasure to have Rabbi Robert Bob Kaplan on our program today. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. See you next time. Take care.